We're all familiar with time, yet it seems strange, doesn't it? Time seems to stand still, and then time flies. Each moment slips through our fingers, fading into the past, and the future never arrives. Each of us is born into this world, then before you know it, it's time to go. All we really have is this fleeting moment we call now. But it's not so with God. The Old Testament says that God remains forever, and from everlasting to everlasting, He is God. And in the New Testament, we see that God is before all time and now and forever. This is what we mean when we say that God is eternal. He has no beginning and no end. He just exists permanently. At this point, a profound question naturally arises. What is God's relationship to time? Does God exist outside of time, unaffected by our ever-changing temporal universe? Or does He exist in time, experiencing one moment after another, as we do? Since the Bible leaves this question open, we need to think through this carefully. Are there any reasons to think that God exists in time? Let's begin by considering God's relationships. God is related to the universe as its creator and sustainer. Could God possibly relate to an ever-changing universe and remain unchanged? This is difficult to imagine for a couple of reasons. First, if God interacted with a temporal universe, there would be at that moment a before and an after in God's life. For example, if God raised Jesus from the dead, He would experience a time before He raised Jesus and a time after He raised Jesus. By getting involved with our temporal world, He would have entered into time and would not exist timelessly. Second, we can also think about God's knowledge. If God is omniscient, then He knows all truths. But there are truths about the universe that are time-sensitive. Statements like, "Today, Carlos ate oysters for the first time." This wasn't true yesterday, and it won't be true tomorrow. If God is omniscient, then as these tense-sensitive statements become true, they become known by Him. This means that God's knowledge is constantly changing, which isn't possible if He is timeless. The only truths a timeless God could know would be tenseless truths, like in 1969, man first walks on the moon. The truth of this statement isn't time-sensitive. It has always been true, and it will always be true. But if God exists in timeless eternity, He would have no idea whether this event has actually occurred. Such ignorance is inconsistent with God's omniscience. So, if God exists outside of time, while the universe exists in time, then He's handcuffed. He can't interact with the universe. And He's also kept in the dark. There are facts about the universe that He cannot know. These objections make it extraordinarily difficult to imagine how God could remain untouched by the constantly changing world He created. On the other hand, if we hold that God is not timeless but exists in time, then other objections arise. First, if God is in time, then He must undergo change. But for those who hold to a strong doctrine of immutability, that God cannot change in any way, This diminishes God and is therefore unacceptable. However, the strong doctrine of immutability needs to be reconsidered. Think about it. God can change in what he does without diminishing in power. He's still omnipotent. He can also change in what he knows without diminishing in knowledge. He's still omniscient. In the same way, God can change in the way he relates to the temporal universe without changing who he is. His essence and attributes remain the same. A second objection to divine temporality is that temporal life is radically incomplete. Beings who exist in time cannot grasp the future any more than they can hold on to the past. Our only hold on existence is the present moment, which vanishes the moment it arrives. Such evanescence seems incompatible with the life of a perfect being. Surely, God must experience life timelessly, all at once, complete, never passing away and never waiting to arrive. But let's remember that God is omniscient. He knows completely the past, present, and future with absolute clarity. He recalls past events with the same vividness and detail as though they were present. Likewise, he foreknows future events as clearly as he knows present events. The passage of time doesn't limit what God knows, and so it's not restrictive and melancholy as it is for us finite temporal creatures. We might also point out that if God exists in time, then he does so differently than we do. Since God never begins to exist, nor ever ceases to exist, it follows that God is not merely temporal, as we are, he's omnitemporal. Let's explore this idea. God's omnitemporality is kind of like his omnipresence. When we say that God is omnipresent, we mean that God is not absent from any location, and he is equally present at every place that exists. In the same way, God's omnitemporality means that God isn't limited in time as we are. He's not absent from any point in time, and he is present at each time that comes to exist. This is why he describes himself as the Alpha and the Omega, he who was and is to come. Now, God's omnitemporality might seem to imply that God has existed for infinite time in the past and will exist for infinite time in the future. But according to the Christian doctrine of creation and the best that modern cosmology has to offer, the temporal universe is not infinite in the past, but was brought into being a finite time ago. Time had a beginning. That means that if God is in time, he has not existed for an infinite time in the past. But we've just said that God is eternal. He had no beginning. So how do we make sense of this? Well, without the creation of time and space, we can imagine God existing alone. Nothing exists but God. So, if time begins to exist at the moment of creation, God exists timelessly without creation. He doesn't change in any way, but he has an unchanging determination to create a temporal world with a beginning. At the moment of creation, he enters into a new relationship, a cause and effect relationship. God is the cause, and the universe is the effect. And thus, in virtue of this relational change, God would step into time at the moment of creation. In summary, our best understanding of God's relationship to time may well be that without a temporal universe, God is timeless. But since that first moment of creation, God is omnitemporal. God's life is eternal life, and He wants you to enjoy eternal life along with Him, so that when your life is over, it's not. He has made this everlasting life available to each one of us through His Son, Jesus Christ. Everyone who believes in Him will not perish, but have everlasting life.